I wish I had known that when I was 22 or 23, that you never know. You literally never know for sure. But it's in that uncertainty and the comfort and the willingness to jump and just go for it and to put your head down and work harder than absolutely anyone else that you're going to get the different outcome.
Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Millennial Mastermind Podcast, the show for entrepreneurial millennials looking for the tools, tactics, and inspiration to turn your dreams into reality. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Aaron Watson to the Mastermind. Aaron is the CEO of Piper Creative, a marketing agency out of Pittsburgh that serves Fortune 500s, startups, and personal brands. In addition to his work at Piper Creative, he has also conducted over 300 interviews on his own podcast, Going Deep with Aaron Watson. Aaron also organizes a successful and profitable conference for hundreds of people called the Going Deep Summit, which he first organized at the age of 26. Aaron, welcome to the show, my man.
Brad, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited for our chat. I feel like we have a lot of shared interests, and you're honestly a little bit further down the entrepreneurial path than I am, and I have a lot that I feel like I can learn from you, so I'm excited just to dive into what your journey's been to this point.
I dig it. Happy to share everything I can.
So just to kick it off, why don't you give me and the listeners just a little bit of background on how the entrepreneurial journey began for you?
So this is probably one of the most impactful moments of my life. And really it comes down to my family is just your standard hardworking middle-class family. There were no entrepreneurs, not a crazy aunt or uncle, not a grandpa, anything like that. Everyone worked and did so very well, but climbed the corporate ladder and kind of emerged from lower class situation to a middle class, upper middle class lifestyle. And as I'm wrapping up college at the University of Pittsburgh, I'm having a conversation with my dad about the career fair and resumes and all that type of stuff. And he says something to me, and I have a very good relationship with my dad. And he says something to me, he goes, Aaron, I hope for you that you'll be smarter than me and start your own business. And by all accounts, I looked at my dad as nothing other than successful. And so for him to so clearly and poignantly make me aware of a shortcoming that he perceived, or maybe not a shortcoming, but an area of opportunity that he had missed, that is deeply psychologically impactful. And so at that stage of the game, like, let me paint this picture for you. I'm 22 years old. I'm just trying to figure out like the job after I graduate. And I don't even know what that word means. Now, in hindsight, I can see that I had a lot of entrepreneurial tendencies throughout the entirety of my life. But at that point, I really didn't have a very concrete definition of what that even meant, what it entailed, how it was different from the traditional path that one might follow, and what these steps were to get there. So what happened in the intervening 4 years I'm 27 now, man. That's 5 years. Sheesh.
It goes by quick. It's once you hit 25, it all just is hard to track.
Yeah. In the intervening 5 years, it was just an absolute nosedive into the deep end of consuming every single thing that I could on the topic, talking to every single person that I could, hence the podcast and the over 300 episodes, to just kind of completely submerge myself in the concepts, the narrative structures, the ideas that make up an entrepreneurial journey versus a more traditional career path. And that has included these, like you said, more than 300 conversations, really as an entry point, not to being some sort of crazy famous influencer, but just to get the fluency and the relationships that are a prerequisite to any entrepreneurial endeavor if it's going to be successful.
That makes a lot of sense. And honestly, that mirrors my thought process on the podcast pretty closely. I started about 2.5 years ago, and it was really just that entry point, that getting the foot in the door with something that resembled entrepreneurship, just to start building some of those relationships, having regular conversations with people who are smarter than me, like yourself, and just getting used to that mindset. So I love that you share that. So at what point did it go from the podcast to something that you're actually making money doing? And I guess when you started the podcast, were you working a job, quote unquote, 9-to-5 type gig at that point? Or had you already started making money doing your own types of things?
Right. So I fall pretty squarely in that camp of you can kind of do it step by step. There's like a piecemeal approach. It's not as if you just flip the switch one day and like just walk out of the office with no plan and start from scratch. And not also necessarily from the school of thought that like you either are or you aren't in a very binary way an entrepreneur. I started off in financial services, basically being sold a bill of goods of you are an entrepreneur, when in reality, you are a salesperson. And within very short amount of time, I was kind of checking all the boxes that one would want to have to be successful, but feeling just almost no level of real fulfillment, just I'm chasing the check, I'm chasing the money. One of the things that I thought not only could increase the fulfillment that I was feeling in that position, but also just frankly make me more successful was to launch the podcast in the first place. Get in the room with people that otherwise wouldn't give me the time of day and learn a lot from these type of characters and hopefully once again establish those relationships that are crucial to any modicum of success regardless of your field. And in order to do that, when you're in financial services, you have to fill out this form for an outside business activity because they don't want anyone to be Bernie Madoff and have these other funds and business endeavors that they're using to embezzle clients' monies and the like, and they want to have a paper trail. So I put in this paper thinking nothing of it. I'm just going to interview some interesting business owners. It's going to be them talking, just going to be me asking questions, right? How could that possibly be an issue? Comes back, denied. My little added note says, we will reconsider in 3 years you being able to do this. And being someone who, like I said, in hindsight, has a lot of the entrepreneurial tendencies, does not like constraints in that kind of sense, like artificial constraints from the outside. I went into my car in the parking lot. I screamed as loudly as I could. I wrote my 2 weeks notice and I handed it in, not the next day because I think it was a Friday, but like the subsequent Monday. And from that point, I knew I had been kind of like just poking around for a while. I knew that I could join a friend of mine's software startup called TopScore, be part of the sales team there. Actually was their VP of sales, and did that for a year and a half while I launched the podcast. As I did that year and a half of really just creating content, no real money of any meaningful degree coming in the door, I basically went from not having any skills in marketing, in content creation, in copywriting, to having some actual marketable skills, which led to then taking on some freelance type of gigs on the side. And I don't, for the sake of the story, I'm kind of batching these and clumping these ideas together. I can get into the nitty gritty of like the pain associated with this process because it's going to sound very linear and very, clear in hindsight when it was simply not the case as it was going on. But I was picking up these opportunities for freelance gigs on the side to help other people with their marketing, to just pull even like really low level tasks of maybe a solopreneur who was really high functioning, like Nathan Latka, another podcaster and very successful SaaS CEO, to basically see the back end of what they were doing and really internalize their process, how they were making money and how their business actually functioned. So I was getting this look at the SaaS startup, I was getting a look at the solopreneur, and I was also getting a back end look at some other agencies that go down the route of really using contractors and part-time people to fill out the work. And then really the agency, maybe business owner or leadership team, are basically responsible for organizing deliverables and then doing the selling. And between all of that, I started to get a model for how this business was actually structured. And then I decided to kind of basically put my own spin on it with Piper, which is really more in the arena of a productized service company as opposed to an agency. And what that kind of nuance means is an agency can mean almost anything, frankly. It really just a person that you hire to do a job is like the fundamental definition of an agency. But in a traditional sense, it's, hey, I have this project, I have this, full vision or something that needs to be realized. Can you do something customized for me? And that could mean as much as like, hey, I'm LeBron James. I need a new contract. Can you, my agent, Rich Paul, figure out how that would work? LeBron's contract is going to be different than Steph Curry's, is going to be different than Kevin Durant's, is going to be different than the 11th man on the LA Lakers. So that's a very like customized agent type of relationship. Whereas on the productized service side, what we're doing with Piper is really in a very tightly defined way, creating a service offering that has a very clear structure to it. And that does two things. Number one, it moves us away from really being tied to like a specific ROI. Like the agent gets hired to like, I want the biggest contract in the league. I want my sales to double. I want some sort of like ROI at the end of the tunnel, versus a productized service like what Piper does amongst a couple of our service offerings is we will produce your podcast for you and make it easy. This is someone who might already know they want a podcast. They might already know that they want these kind of different boxes checked or this additional pillar to their branding, but they've already come up with how that fits into the greater picture, as opposed to us doing that for them. Now we can offer our 2 cents. We have consulting as part of that productized service, just to give them some perspective on expected growth and how to promote and other things like that. But it's so kind of neatly defined that on the client's end, we are more of like something that gets fit into other pieces. And frankly, other agencies hire us to subcontract out and execute on the some work that they might have for a larger client. And simultaneously, the clear definition within our organization means that we can hire for very specific skill sets, and whether that's in a part-time, full-time capacity, or even some of the interns that we have doing the most low-level tasks, we have a very clearly defined set of skills that they can learn, how to go about learning them, tasks that need to be completed, so that they can start to get some of these kind of baseline skills, but also be contributing members of the team.
That's awesome. There's a lot I want to dig in there. And you mentioned that, especially in those earlier days when you started picking up some freelance gigs, that you're bucketing it to be concise, but it wasn't quite as linear, and there was a lot going on at that point. Would you mind just sharing a bit of that? Because I think that that's something that's more common than what we hear about, because so often just the natural way that interviewing, podcasting, these type of things work is that there's such a survivor bias that you don't hear some of those early stages, and you don't hear some of those times when it wasn't just checking the box and moving on to the next level. So I would love to hear a little bit about what that stage was like for you and what some of the accompanying emotions and thoughts going through your mind were.
So from the freelancing standpoint, and really this is kind of back to that differentiation between an agency and a productized service, I very quickly realized that the only way to like make more money or to go up at that point, the constraint I had was I would have to just work more hours, and I had no real anchor to prove to someone my value. I was being plugged in at the very bottom of some sort of process, and there was no kind of control or sovereignty over my value. So for example, one of the agencies that I plugged into, I was doing some copywriting and other writing for them, and they just had the base rate that this writing job was for. It's not like if I went out and just wrote something that was 3 times as good as my previous writings, that I would get some sort of bonus or some sort of upside, or like, oh, from now on, we're going to pay you more because clearly you're a better writer. And it gives you this very intense sense of, oh, I've more or less just created a low hourly wage for myself from the assimilation of like 3 to 4 different projects that I'm handling. Mm-hmm. And there's a distinct feeling of like helplessness or hopelessness, or just like I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to get out of the situation. I feel like I'm kind of in quicksand, because the only thing I know how to do is maybe, trade out one of these jobs for another. But there's not anything that I can like really hang my hat on and say, double my pay or double the rate at which I can charge for this freelancing gig. I mean, you could go on an Elancer or a Fiverr or something like that, and there's plenty of people that find a lot of success in doing that. But it seemed just so unattainable to signal to the outside world that the value of what I was providing was higher than what I was being compensated for. And there's this kind of like I don't know, like quicksand is really the only phrase that I have to explain it. And it's very, it's just a feeling of like being disempowered and not knowing the next step. And I think it's really that uncertainty that, without like a clear path forward, that leads to most of the anxiety. Like, I'm not absolutely bawling out right now. Piper's, only a year old. It doesn't make sense for me to like just take oodles and oodles of cash out of a business. And yet, because there's now this framework for, okay, if we can get these SOPs written and we can bring this person in and we can get 3 more clients for this productized service offering, there's a very clear kind of path forward if we proceed the way that we are, that the top line revenue of the business goes up, my compensation goes up, my ability to fund other ideas that I have and build out the suite and the brand of Piper to a much, much, much deeper degree. And that is actually where the kind of like satisfaction and the problem solving and the empowerment comes from, as opposed to that feeling of just like, I don't even know, like I just know it's wrong, but I have no idea how to fix it. It's like, I'm not particularly mechanical. If my car breaks down, under almost any circumstance, I need to go to the mechanic. And standing on the side of the road, just staring at your car with no idea what's wrong or how to fix it is like, in a micro sense, I can get this towed and I can pay for it to get fixed. That's a kind of a different micro version of that. But when it's your career and when it's your work and you don't know that like next step that you're going to take, it's that feeling of just being completely powerless in a much more extended firm. And that's really painful.
Yeah, no, you're speaking my language. And it's funny because I feel like that is a place where I'm at to a degree right now, where there's not that very clear picture of what direction to take things. And so as you talk through this concept of productizing your services and being able to have a very structured approach to how you build on that business, and that gives you that path to what's next and how to fund some of these other ideas, that just gets me pumped because it makes perfect sense.
Totally. And there's a really good parable. I'm going to like basically butcher it, but the idea is that like you're as valuable as the impact that like your fist has on a bucket of water. And this is going to be like super convoluted, but basically like, oh, when your fist goes in there, like, wow, like I'm taking up so much space, I'm displacing all this water. But like the moment you pull your fist out, the water just coalesces back and it's like your fist was never there. And it's this really like high low of, you can have a big impact, you can do a lot, but like at the end of the day, almost everything you do, or maybe everything you do, is in some way, shape, or form replaceable. And it's all about the perspective that you take of like, well, when I put together the Going Deep Summit, which is the event and conference that I hold in the city of Pittsburgh, I literally held all the strings last year. There were interns, there was like my girlfriend helping, and that was about it. And we pulled it off, and it was insanity. And I barely slept for like the 4 days beforehand. But in hindsight now, as we have like started to build a team around Piper and we're approaching the next one in March, I'm like handing all this stuff off that was it was beyond mission critical last year. There was no one else who could possibly do it. There's no one else I could possibly trust. And it's like simultaneously exhilarating, like, oh, someone else is going to like take this for me. Amazing. You got to like look over their shoulder and just make sure they're getting it done and doing it the right way. But that's fantastic. But it's also this like deep realization of like, I'm not as essential. I'm not as much of a linchpin as I thought I was. And that kind of like paradox, I think, is something that a lot of people will either be in denial about or struggle to accept. But there's actually, once again, a great degree of empowerment when you acknowledge that, because it's going to allow you to go further.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Going Deep Summit. So last year, I take it was the first year that you held that event. What was the inspiration behind starting that?
So I attended South by Southwest, Advertising Week, Thrival, Next Gen Summit, Digital Life Design Conference, and one other that's escaping my memory right now. And I very quickly was more interested in like the business of the event than some of the panels and speakers themselves, because as big as the names of some of those events might be, there's plenty of like really crappy panels where you just kind of zone out at any of those. And so I was thinking about, how do I make this more interesting? How does this business work? What's like how profitable is something like this? And you start to realize that like the sponsorships that get sold and the access and all this other stuff that happens at some of these events is really, it's a real business. And I also just loved attending stuff like Thrival, which is another Pittsburgh-based event. And so I wanted to create something that was kind of like, there's this trend of, locally sourced, locally raised food and alcohol and this and that, the other thing. It's like, well, let's put locally sourced ideas in our brains and not just exclusively import ideas from the coasts, from, the biggest thought leaders. And let's like see what's going on here in Pittsburgh, and who better to curate that list of speakers than me, someone who had, spoken to more than 200 of the area's most interesting characters, sat down with them, recognized like, oh, snap, this person's really articulate and really underrated. And, this person's actually a little overrated. We're not necessarily going to invite them to come speak at the event. And so what we came up with was this fantastic lineup of speakers. It wasn't the Aaron Watson show. It was really a platform and a day that we created to feature these characters. And just to name a few of them and kind of, paint a picture for people of how diverse this lineup of speakers was. We had Ed Lattimore, who is an absolute Twitter sensation. I think he's over 65,000 Twitter followers now. A bunch of high-level VCs, hedge fund guys, other investors all follow him. He's a heavyweight boxer. I think he was 8-1, has a physics degree, and writes books. Is an absolute dynamo, unlike anyone else that I've ever met. And I think back before he came on, he had not really ever been invited to do any public speaking. He was probably under 20,000 Twitter followers, and he's just blown up in the last year. But I was introduced to him by proxy of the podcast, spoke with him. It's like, this guy has not only different ideas, a different delivery style. He's a fascinating dude. And he opened the thing up and talked about getting knocked out and then putting yourself back together, just not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychically. And that's how we started the whole thing off. A couple other speakers that we had: Adam Harridan, one of the biggest mushroom foragers in all of North America and all of the world, frankly. Massive following on YouTube. Learn Your Land if people want to check it out. You pick up a mushroom, he can give you its name, its Latin name, its medicinal or nutritional benefits or risk factors if it's poisonous. He can tell you how it was used by ancient cultures for this, that, or the other thing, and connected all the lessons that he learns from going out into nature every day, going on 2-hour hikes and leading other people on hikes through the woods to help them identify different mushrooms, and how that can translate into a business or an organization or a family. These timeless lessons that Mother Nature teaches that have allowed Mother Nature to exist longer than anything any of us humans have ever made. We also had two teachers, Michelle King, Nick Kazmarek, talking about how they teach empathy in the classroom, in a diverse classroom of high and lower class children, of black and white children, of all sorts of different backgrounds, how they cultivate community and empathy in that environment. I could go on and on down the list, but it wasn't like you show up and it's all CMOs and advertisers trying to talk over one another. It wasn't a bunch of people who had paid to be on stage and were doing a glorified sales pitch over their 32 minutes. It was literally all just people who were basically trying to give their version of not a TEDx talk, but a TED talk, because it was that type of platform for them. And it was something that they knew would live on our channels and be documented from the jump.
That's pretty interesting. And so what was your main goal with that, or what is your main goal moving forward? Is that to be a branch of your business that is an income producing piece of it, or is there another focus with that specific event?
So the word synergy gets a bad rap, but it's very synergistic with the other elements of the business. So if you're someone who exclusively listens to my podcast, Going Deep with Aaron, and you never meet another listener in person, if you never meet me, if you never meet any of the guests on the show, it's a very lonely experience to exclusively interact with something digitally. So it's a way of bringing those kind of characters into the real world, not just to meet me, it's not about me, but to meet one another. Because the type of person that would give up their Saturday morning and pay for the ticket and travel to be there is a certain type of person. And that's your tribe. The absolute best thing I heard, there was a guy, Roddy Gibbs, who attended, and he said he felt like that event, the Going Deep Summit, was when he found his tribe. He was looking for it. He hadn't been able to find it. And that was like the turning over of the leaf when he found his tribe. And that is the absolute highest praise or kind of acknowledgement that I could receive as it pertains to that. In terms of practical business application, there are people who attended, like a spouse or a partner or a friend that was dragged there, or someone who ended up there because of one speaker who was exposed to the brand of Going Deep and Aaron Watson because of that. And that's valuable. There's relationships that are deepened. There's brand that's deepened with someone who maybe only heard me but finally meets me in person. And then conversely, we have Piper now. We have these clients, and one of the type of things you're always trying to do for these different clients is give them a special experience, make them feel really valued by your organization. And giving, if we're selling VIP tickets, but we give 5 VIP tickets to our best clients, they get this special experience. They get something that is assigned a lot of value because they can go look up the price of a ticket online, but it's deepening that relationship, strengthening the retention of our clients for Piper, and vice versa. It's branded with Piper colors. The whole team from Piper is there. If you've seen them in the vlog, if you've seen them through some other sort of interaction, it's deepening that relationship. So while synergy gets like a bad rap as corporate lingo, there really is, a lot of synergy there.
So you mentioned the vlog there, and that's one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I found that super interesting when I was doing some research for this episode and saw that you, since day one of Piper, have been creating these vlogs that really document the process of building the company. And I think you have 60 or so of them now, just going through the day-to-day and how you've grown the business. What was your inspiration? What was kind of the thought process behind that? And have you seen any benefits, any business benefits to documenting your journey that way?
So real quick, right off the bat, absolutely business benefits. We have a ton of footage that we can then slice and dice up and put on a platform like LinkedIn or Instagram. We've had people who literally came across a YouTube video and reached out to us for consulting requests and other requests. It didn't always materialize, but for it to even be creating inbound sales opportunities when we've been doing it for less than a year is just surreal.
Yeah.
But the kind of concept there is really number one, in the same sense, like I think back to that 22-year-old version of Aaron. What would he have valued from? I'm creating literally exactly what I wanted and what I was looking for. I was looking for who matters, who's really doing the interesting work in the city of Pittsburgh. What's it like to start a business? Like, where do you go? What do you do? What questions should you be asking? That's where the vlog comes in. You can, at some point in the future, and we're talking way down the line, Piper's going to have hopefully hundreds of people, thousands of people, and there's literally going to be footage of like Hannah, my co-founder, and I standing there being like, well, we're about to start. Hope this goes well. Like you don't know. That's the other part of it. It's like you literally never know. And I wish, it's like a tongue twister, I wish I had known that when I was 22 or 23, that you never know. You literally never know for sure. But it's in that uncertainty and the comfort and the willingness to jump and just go for it and to put your head down and work harder than absolutely anyone else that you're going to get the different outcome. And now it's a tool that, just in terms of having to pump out that many episodes and do the type of editing and follow in the tradition of Casey Neistat and Gary Vee and all these other characters that are really elevated to a new level because of their vlogging. Hopefully it translates and is a similar resource for entertainment and education for the next generation.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Gary Vee, and it reminds me very much of what he does with his vlogs, except instead of starting it after you've hit a pretty large level of success, you started it right at the beginning, which I think is going to be super cool. And like you were saying, you're really playing the long game, knowing that down the road, once Piper's become a much larger organization, you have this full documentation of how it got to that point. And what a better gift to be able to pass along to the next generation or future business people who want to see how you got to that point. I mean, I think it's awesome.
And it's not just that like we're a charity case trying to just like help other people. Like I don't want to make it, too glossy in that same sense. Like it's very easy to gloss it over. There's a massive massive advantage that we have when it comes to our own operations with Piper. So there's a couple things that are really interesting, back to the world of creatives and agencies and productized services, this whole mess of do creative work for other people. And agencies chew people up and spit them out, and they don't stick around. And there's a kind of a question about why is that the case? Why does that happen? And the trope is that every copywriter, and this isn't always true, but every copywriter is a failed novelist, and every commercial video producer is a failed cinematographer, and that's a oversimplification. That's not always the case, but that's kind of a trope within the world of agencies and some of this stuff. So what we create with Piper is a chance to, okay, you're going to do some client work, and that's going to be the backbone of how you provide value to the company, but you're also going to be a character in our own content. Piper has its own media channel. This isn't, once again, the Aaron Watson show. There's a lot of me because there's not a lot of people in the organization right now, but Tori Meglio, Hannah Phillips. These are other characters that you need to know as part of the Piper universe. And as more people come in, you're going to get introduced to more of them. And as much as people might come to me and say, oh, I see your stuff on LinkedIn or whatever, there's also people who Aaron Thompson, Craig Ketchum, where are they? These are two of our interns that I'm bringing up now. Where are they? Are they still with the company? How are they doing? And that doesn't happen. People don't just come up to other 7-person organizations, if the founder of a 7-person organization, and ask them about their 7th employee. It's just is not something I've ever witnessed or experienced, unless it's their cousin or their best friend or something. But because we're creating this universe of characters, and the expectation that in addition to client work, Piper is going to be putting out media ourselves in the form of the podcast, in the form of the vlog, in the form of a bunch of micro shows that we're launching in 2019, that character building is not only the basis of a North Star, hey, if you kill it, or maybe you create a micro show or some sort of Piper media vehicle that really takes off, you could just become a media person. You could, if you're doing some show that's just bringing tons and tons of people in, then that's all you have to do. We'll provide the infrastructure, we'll pay you. You don't have to negotiate deals or literally anything like that. You can literally just be the pure creative that you might desperately want to be, or is your kind of North Star end goal. And it's an actual back to that, what are the next steps? How do I progress? How do I, even take this thing to the next level that I was struggling with as a freelancer? We're solving that for a bunch of people along the way. You're going to start off, you're going to learn these basic skills of creativity. Then you're going to become autonomous. We're going to trust you to do this work by yourself. Then we're going to push you up a level, and you're going to have to really, bring it creatively for our clients who pay us the most and expect the highest caliber stuff. Then you're going to get to contribute to Piper stuff, or maybe you're going to be contributing to Piper stuff along the way. But when you have that great idea that you want to try, that you want to experiment with, but you need a platform that already has exposure, Piper has that platform. Go for it. Start the show, start the cooking show, start the gaming show, whatever it may be. We'll support it. We understand that that's going to be part of what you do for us. And then if that thing takes off, literally, we're happy to pay you to just do that, because that amount of attention, that amount of eyeballs, we know what to do with that attention. We know what to do when enough people are looking through the window at our stuff, at what we're doing. And that type of framework that we can offer to an employee is fundamentally differentiated than 99.9% of the businesses out there. And that is the absolute core of what we're doing and why it makes sense for us from a business standpoint.
Yeah, that's super unique and super creative way of approaching it. Was that your idea, your thought process from the get-go, or has that been kind of an evolution as you've built out the vlog and built out some of the more developed arms of Piper?
Right. So I basically had this from the jump. I pitched Hannah, my co-founder, back in the August before the Going Deep Summit on this idea for a company. I said, we're going to be a company that helps other companies produce vlogs, and we're going to vlog ourselves from the jump. And she got it immediately. And literally from that point forward, it was never going to be just the Aaron Watson show. It's going to be the Piper show. And we acknowledged at the beginning it's just us, but it's going to be more and more characters along the way. And actually, who does a better job of this? I'm just from what you're saying, I'm sure you're familiar with Gary Vee. Some of your audience may be as well. It's actually much more similar to what Barstool is doing. Barstool Sports is doing, where Dave Portnoy is El Presidente. You got some other massive characters, KFC, Big Cat, Fran and Rhea. I could go on and on down the list. But what they can do as a platform to introduce a new character, get some attention, get some eyeballs on them, and let them spin out with their own thing or experiment, try a new show, and very quickly see in the data this is trending the right way or it's not, and how you can just keep pumping that stuff out. That's what, I mean, media companies have done forever, but in the modern age, they've created the model for how you do this. They don't have the services underneath it. They're doing events, and then they're doing a lot of advertising dollars tied to their media because they just have such tremendous reach. But for a company like ours, where we don't have that reach yet to really drive a ton of top line revenue from an advertising and sponsorship standpoint, and we may never want to, that idea of still bringing in new characters, establishing their value, and then maybe instead of, it's just the new entertainment show that we're going to sell an advertiser on sponsoring this golf show now. Instead, it's, we just got a brand new person who is a music producer, and they produced all the music that you hear in the intros and outros of the podcast and the vlog and the 10 other things that we're doing. If you like that, our music producer guy can create your unique sound, your company sound, which is once again a differentiated service. There's plenty of agencies that actually do that, but because we maybe already have your business from the other service offerings, or we just have your attention and none of the other service offerings have been right for you, but you see the Piper sound option, like, shucks, that's exactly what I needed. I'm going to go with them because I've gotten so much value from them. I know them so well. I trust them. And when Aaron says this music producer, making up a name, Elena, is the absolute best, I believe him.
Fascinating. I love that line of thinking. So Aaron, what would be the top lesson that you would say you've learned over the past year from the journey of starting Piper, going through this vlogging experience, taking on the clients of your own? What's the biggest takeaway that you've had?
The biggest takeaway comes back to that ego of being able to let every single thing go. And that is like now the goal that I have. The goal is that the quote unquote, eventually the quote unquote face or faces of Piper, I'm not the first thing that pops up. The goal is that the primary person doing the consulting isn't me. The goal is that the, primary person bringing in new business isn't me. And right now, all those things are the situation that it is Aaron Watson, but there's a pathway to eventually all of those things get removed and the fist comes out of the water and Piper keeps on chugging along.
That's great. Yeah, and that's such a hard thing to do. And it's a hard thing even to recognize, you used the word ego there, that there is that element of ego in it. Especially, I know my experience personally with having the podcast is you're the only person day in, day out working on that thing. And then you go and you create this idea that's meant to be bigger than yourself. And I'm sure that there is some existential crisis that happens there that you have to go in and look and be very honest with yourself about how you're going to go about doing that and what the reasonings are.
100%, but that's the fun of it. It's a immensely complex problem that I get to spend the next hopefully 50, 60, 70 years trying to solve.
I love it. So Aaron, where can people find more about you, more about the podcast, more about Piper, all those things? Where would you point people online to check it out?
On Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Aaron Watson 59. I'm very good there about announcing new podcast episodes, vlog episodes, the interesting stuff. I'm doing a better job of not just pumping out every single thing that we do and making sure that it's like, hey, this is something we've really done well recently. If you're not on either of those platforms, LinkedIn is the absolute place to be for your own brand, whatever you may be doing. We're just getting a ton, like literally a disgusting majority of our clients through our LinkedIn content. I strongly recommend that everyone start spending more time there. And if you want to, steal some of my strategies or even message me directly for advice, LinkedIn is probably the best place to do so.
Very cool. Well, you dropped a ton of value on this episode, so I really appreciate you stopping by, Aaron. And thank you just for sharing your journey and continuing to put good content out there, and for just being a great example of how people can do really cool things. So much appreciated, my brother.
Brad, thank you so much for the privilege of being on your show. I really appreciate it.